This quiet suburban street was about to become a crime scene. Inside one house, 3 of its residents had been murdered. On the surface, it was a robbery gone wrong. But the evidence would tell a different story.
Whoever had taken that piece of carpet wanted it removed because it may have something that would identify the person that had committed these crimes.
It was quite likely that something had been placed over her head at the time that she was attacked.
At the initial stages, everyone is a suspect.
All of the facts and circumstances ultimately pointed in one direction and one direction alone.
One of the telephone calls said there'd be 3 members of your family dead.
There was one weapon used, one assailant. It was quite a sustained attack and also very, very violent.
The person responsible for these killings had left his calling card.
The triple murder of Jennifer, Sarah and Adrian de Gruchy would baffle police with its apparent lack of motive. But finding the killer was possible. The father of forensics, Edmund Lockhart, wrote in 1910 that every contact leaves a trace. And in solving this crime, those words were never so true.
Matthew come from over the road and he looked in a distressed state, you know, sort of in a bad way, and as he got close he said there's something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
Something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
Sarah being an epileptic, I thought Jenny was having a bit of problem giving her the medicine. She just wanted someone to help her. I went in the front door, I seen Jenny's door just slightly ajar, so I thought I'd go up there and see if she's in her bedroom. I walked to the door, called out to Jenny. Had no reply, so I pushed the door open. The bedroom was dark. I seen a lump on the bed and I don't know, I just thought she was just going to jump up and go boo or something like that. So I walked over beside the bed, grabbed hold of the blanket and pulled it back, and that's when I found Jenny. I just couldn't wait to get out of there. That's when I called out to my father-in-law and told him to ring the police and ambulance.
We were met by a young male that had walked out of the house. He was crying. He was saying things like, "What's happened? Who's done this?"
18-year-old Matthew de Gruchy was totally distraught and was immediately taken to hospital. Inside the house, members of his family were dead.
When I first got there, it was around 9 o'clock or thereabouts, and went into the house. I had a look at the first bedroom, which was the master bedroom. I saw a deceased adult female. I then moved down a hallway towards the second bedroom, where I saw a deceased teenage female. We then searched the remainder of the house, and we entered through a door into the garage, and that's where we found the deceased form of Adrian. The injuries were horrific. They were quite distressing, actually, to view. It's not something that you'd want anyone really to have to see.
When I arrived at the crime scene, the police showed me the bodies of 3 deceased people. I think with Jennifer de Gruchy, she was lying in bed with the blankets and sheets partially up over her. There was a set of glasses on a bedside table nearby that to me looked as if she'd hopped into bed and had her reading glasses on and maybe had turned the light off, put her glasses beside her and had gone off to sleep. and perhaps after that time was attacked.
There was not a large amount of blood spatter in the room, which was basically inconsistent with the degree of trauma which had been inflicted on the victim. It was quite likely that something had been placed over her head at the time that she was attacked. However, we did see some very small blood staining on the wall and on the bedhead behind the deceased, which did appear to us to be unusual in its shape and its location.
I examined Sarah and found that she was lying on her bed with a set of Walkmans nearby and was listening to maybe some music or something like that. So it made me feel, if Sarah didn't hear anything, and presumably she didn't, maybe she was then attacked. Again, with Sarah's room, there were similar circumstances in relation to the amount of blood staining which was evident. There was, in our opinion, relatively small amounts of blood staining, and again it appeared likely that something had been placed over her head at the time of the attack. Adjacent to Sarah's body was a blood-stained pillow, which seemed to have come from another part of the house. It didn't look like one of the pillows that she'd slept on. I wondered whether that pillow had been used to maybe partially smother her, or it might have been a combination of the person or persons involved tried to smother her and at the same time were bludgeoning her about the head.
Having examined the injuries to Jennifer and Sarah, Dr. Carla found evidence that 15-year-old Adrian was also a victim of a surprise attack.
It looked to me like Adrian was working in the garage and might have been doing some repair work on a chair. There was some woodwork glue around and the chair was upturned. I thought, though, that not only that, but looking at Adrian's injuries, particularly at the back of his head, seemed to suggest to me that perhaps the attacker came in and launched a blitz-type attack or a very rapid attack on Adrian's head at the back. There was also blood on the ceiling of the garage, and it had to me the characteristics of what's called cast-off blood. In other words, it's blood that's on a already bloodied weapon that's been used in an attack on somebody. And when that weapon is brought back or raised upwards in a rapid way, any blood that's on that weapon is literally cast off that weapon and strikes things like the ceiling or the wall or any other objects that happen to be nearby.
It gives us an indication of where the assailant had actually been standing and also in what position the victim had been at the time of being struck.
Who had so violently attacked and murdered this family? And what was the murder weapon that had been used? The victims themselves would hold the answers.
Are mystified by the horrific murder of a mother and her 2 teenage children battered to death in their Wollongong home. Their bodies were discovered this morning by another son who was away for the night. The woman's husband, who works in Sydney, is returning to the house tonight.
The woman's 19-year-old son collapsed in shock after discovering Jenny de Gruchy's battered body in the main bedroom of the house when he arrived home around 9 this morning. In a second bedroom, he found his 13-year-old sister Sarah also dead. Her 15-year-old brother Adrian was later discovered in the garage. Forensic experts searched the house for clues this morning.
There were a couple of unusual aspects of the scene. In Jennifer's bedroom, which was the main bedroom of the premises, there was a relatively large area of carpet which had been cut from the floor, which in itself was unusual because the house was only relatively new. There were also a couple of smaller pieces which had been cut, one from near the base of the bed and another near the doorway. These, of course, pose questions to the investigator of why has the carpet been cut.
Whoever had taken that piece of carpet wanted it removed because it may have indicated to us, after testing, something that would identify him. Maybe the assailant had spilt some blood, and for that reason that person had to remove that carpet.
And in the hallway, there was further evidence of the killer possibly covering his tracks.
The hallway was subjected to a very detailed examination. We used an instrument known as a polylight, which is an artificial light source we often use. It aids us in detecting small amounts of trace evidence. It had been noted that there was a reddish-coloured stain in a couple of locations in the hallway, but they looked as though they might have been slightly diluted. It may well have been that this blood was in fact that of the offender, and he may well have made an attempt to clean up that blood from the floor, knowing full well that it was his own blood. We conducted presumptive testing for the presence of blood on the stains that we observed in the hallway, and they proved positive. So from that, a number of swabs were taken and sent away for further analysis.
In fact, 60-odd swabs were taken at the house, which included the tiny and unusual shaped blood spots from the wall behind Jennifer's bed.
Police haven't ruled out robbery as a motive after discovering a video recorder missing from the home.
The appearance of possible robbery at the house was isolated just to a couple of rooms. There was no evidence of major ransacking of the premises at all. The types of items that were stolen were things like kids' calculators and Sony games, this type of item. We did locate a cabinet from which it appeared that there was likely a video recorder missing, whereas more valuable items were left untouched. The circumstance was as such that there may have been a bungled burglary which led to the victims being attacked, or one possible scenario is that there's been an attempt made to hide the crime.
Police suspected this was a staged break and enter, and the post-mortem examination pointed to it being done by one offender.
I felt that in this particular case of all three de Gruchy deaths that there was a distinct possibility that there was one weapon used, one assailant, it was a very rapid attack on all three people, that it was quite a sustained attack on each one, and also very, very violent. The pattern of injuries was very similar in all three cases. Sarah had injuries which were very similar to Adrian's head injuries, about her forehead and the top of her skull, but she also had some injuries on her arms, particularly her right arm, that looked to me as if she'd put up a bit of a struggle. I think it reasonable to think that she raised her arm in some way because there was a distinctive line of bruising on the inner aspect of her right forearm that had a very distinctive appearance. It had a squared off end and a linear strip of bruising that I think was caused by a shaft-like or a cylindrical object.
The injury which we noted on the arm of Sarah, we also noted similar linear type injuries on the body of Adrian.
There were a number of quite distinctive bruises on the front of the chest that were about 15 centimetres or so in length, but on top of that in the upper chest region, just below the collarbone, was a very distinctive circular shaped bruise. And I had to ask myself, and I asked the police, what might have caused not only the injuries which were quite linear on the front of the chest, but which also might have caused the circular shaped bruise on the upper part of the chest. So after a bit of discussion, we wondered whether it was something like a tyre lever or a car jack, a wheel brace, something like that, which, if used in various ways, could have produced these injuries.
The police were desperate to find that murder weapon, but it was what they didn't find that would lead the forensic team down an unexpected path.
The thought then goes to where would a wheel brace normally be? The next conclusion is it would be in a motor vehicle, and there was only one motor vehicle there. Jennifer de Gruchy's car, which was inside the crime scene area.
On opening the boot, it was noted that the hatch, which normally contains the vehicle jack and wheel brace, was slightly ajar, which indicated that in all likelihood at some stage or other someone had accessed this small compartment. On opening the hatch, the car jack was in position. However, the actual wheel brace and the car jack handle were missing. So it was unusual. We searched the rear of the vehicle for the wheel brace, but it wasn't located. On examining the spare wheel, it still had the flash. There was a small beading around the tyre surface, which was indicative that this particular wheel had never been on the road.
So there'd been never any need for those items to be used, and therefore there was never any need for them to be removed from where they'd been put in when the car had been manufactured.
The police confirmed that when Jennifer bought the car, the wheel brace was there.
Subsequently, we were able to be supplied with a similar type of wheel brace which would normally be with the vehicle. It was very similar indeed to the type of injuries which were inflicted on the deceased.
The injuries on the deceased bodies of Sarah and Adrian Gruchy told a story of a brutal and vicious attack. It also gave clues to the murder weapon, a wheel brace that police were desperate to find.
Police have appealed for help in their hunt for the killer of a family of 3 battered to death in a frenzied attack. Detectives were back at the Albion Park home today with scanning equipment to search for clues and the murder weapon. A post-mortem has revealed 40-year-old Jennifer Gruchy and her teenage children, Sarah and Adrian, were bludgeoned to death with a heavy metal object.
And what I'm now asking is for assistance from the public to report anything of a suspicious nature that they observed or saw or heard of. The SES and Fire Brigade and police conduct a search of the backwater of Lake Warilla, which backed up to the house where the Gruchys lived, just to see if anything had been tossed. We didn't find anything.
Meanwhile, Jennifer's car that had its wheel brace missing had become an exhibit and was taken to the police compound to be forensically examined.
As a result of that examination, we were able to elicit another piece of evidence that assisted us with our inquiries.
A small, what appeared to be a carpet fibre, a little over a centimetre or so in length, was located on the floor of the vehicle behind the driver's seat. The significance of the carpet was that it appeared to be a very similar colour to the missing carpet from the main bedroom of the premises. It certainly didn't appear to be similar to any other carpet which was actually, for example, which was fitted to the car itself. A sample of carpet was taken from the main bedroom of the premises, and it was sent away for comparison examination with the carpet fibre recovered from the vehicle to see if they'd come from the same origin. The results of the examination or the comparison of the carpet indicated that it was highly probable that they had originated from the same source.
Detectives tonight are again interviewing Mrs. Gruchy's husband and 19-year-old son, hoping they can provide new clues to the killings.
At any inquiry, at the initial stages, everyone is a suspect. And as is the case in this inquiry, in the initial stages, Wayne Gruchy was a suspect. He was interviewed about his movements the previous evening. To use the terminology that most people are aware of, he had alibis.
Wayne's alibi was that he was in Sydney, an hour and a half's drive from his home, playing golf that day and staying the night at his parents' place.
We were able to speak to those people and they confirmed his whereabouts.
However, other witnesses told another story.
There was information supplied to us that particular people had seen a Commodore which was consistent with the car that was normally used by Wayne Gruchy, and further that they saw a person in that car that was not inconsistent with the description of Wayne in the early hours of the morning. The only problem with that was that the car that was normally used by Wayne had been involved in a motor vehicle collision some days prior and was actually in the smash repairs, which we were able to confirm. That showed that what they were telling us wasn't right. Further to that, the times of death decided by the pathologist weren't consistent with the possibility that Wayne could have travelled down after retiring in Sydney and committing the crimes and then returning.
I felt that the time of death was between approximately 8 p.m. on the 12th of March up to about 1 a.m. on the 13th of March 1996. And my reasons for those times are that based on the examination of the bodies at the scene, the temperature of the bodies, when comparing it with the ambient temperature in the garage and in the house, as well as stiffening of the bodies and the gravitational settling of the blood, all three things in conjunction made me think that this was an approximate time for when these people might have met their deaths.
As police continued their search for the murder weapon, the missing piece of carpet, and the stolen items from the house, other important evidence was uncovered.
Not far from the body of Adrian was a red-coloured jerry can. The unusual thing was that the lid on the jerry can was actually in the open position, and examination revealed that there was a quantity of petrol within the jerry can. But it wasn't until we'd moved the body that it became evident that there was petrol on the deceased.
On Adrian's left side, there was some skin peeling, which I noticed, possibly suggestive that there might have been an attempt to partially douse Adrian in petrol and set him alight, and thereby setting the whole crime scene alight as well.
The fact that the deceased had petrol on his body and on his clothes, examination of the jerry can was very important, obviously.
The jerry can, along with other physical and biological evidence found at the scene, was now in laboratories being astutely examined. In one of those tubes, the DNA of the killer would be found. 3 members of the Gruchy family had been murdered between 8 p.m. on the 12th of March 1996 and 1 a.m. on the following morning. Detectives believed the robbery was staged and the killings had been intentional. As yet, no murder weapon, the stolen items, nor the cut-out piece of carpet from Jennifer's bedroom had been found. But the jerry can that had been used to douse one of the victims was yielding results.
The usual procedure in any examination is to use just a bleak lighting, a visual examination. We use a polylight to assist us with this. The fingerprints that appeared on the handle and the side of the handle of the petrol can were very good impressions. They didn't require further enhancement. They were photographed and used for comparison purposes.
To photograph the prints found on the underside of the handle, a mirror was placed underneath to capture the ridges that would be identical to one and one only person who had handled that can.
They then compared the fingerprints and identified the left, middle and ring fingers to be identical with the inked impressions of Matthew Gruchy.
However, Matthew had used the jerry can often. The family cars were filled with petrol from this can, and Matthew was the one who did it. But what of the blood potentially recognised as being that of the killer? The diluted blood in the hallway and the small spots behind Jennifer's bed that were out of place with the other blood spatter evidence.
Detectives are waiting for the results of blood tests on a young man who said he found his family murdered in their home near Wollongong. Matthew Gruchy and his father Wayne underwent the tests at a local hospital as they continue to help police investigate the triple murder.
The advantage of DNA is in the ability to discriminate quite easily between different individuals. Here we have a family, and I was able to easily distinguish through simple DNA testing the different people in the family, even though we were talking about a related group of individuals.
Dr. Gertz had received dozens of swabs from the house and needed to distinguish whose blood was whose, and whose was potentially the killer's.
Most of the blood matched that of the deceased, but the blood staining that was on the back of Jennifer's bed and the blood staining down the hallway had DNA that matched that of Matthew Gruchy and not any other member of his family.
But how did Matthew's blood get there? His girlfriend, Alyssa, told police she had seen no injuries on him on the night of the murders.
Because Matthew had said he'd gone to his girlfriend's place, we then, as part of the investigation, obviously we spoke to his girlfriend. We were able to piece together a bit of a timeline.
Hey, Alyssa.
The police knew the couple had spoken with each other at 8 p.m.
He'd made an arrangement with her to attend there that evening, and he hadn't arrived, and so she made a phone call back to the Gruchy household to speak to Matthew, and that was around 10 o'clock. That phone call went unanswered, so after that she went to bed. She wasn't aware if Matt was still coming up or not.
Although Matthew had said to his girlfriend that he would be there soon, he didn't arrive until 11 p.m. Some 3 hours after speaking with her.
He went into the house and he just told her that the reason he'd been delayed is because his mother had asked him to stay back because they'd received some crank phone calls. He'd said that one of the persons that had sent the crank call said to him, there'll be 3 members of your family dead.
Matthew had never told police at any time that his family had been threatened on the night they were murdered. So to confirm Alyssa's statement, investigators would need to check the telephone records of the de Gruchy household to uncover the truth.
We were able to establish telephone calls that had been made because we were able to go back and speak to people that made those calls. However, the telephone calls that Matthew mentioned to his girlfriend about people ringing and making the threats, we weren't able to establish if that had actually taken place. If that had happened, do you think it was one of the first things that would have been said to us?
Well, this is an electronic recorded interview between Detective Sergeant DJ Sharkey and Matthew Wayne de Gruchy. When the call's made, I'll just try and clarify myself. The phone rings, you pick the phone off out of the cradle. How long a time after picking the phone up does the line stay open?
When you just hear the beeps.
So, are you saying that they hang up as soon as you pick the phone up? Is that what happens?
Well, as soon as you pick the phone up to put it to your ear, you just hear the beeps.
We were trying to establish whether the calls had connected. We were asking him, had he taken the call? We were asking questions along the lines of, did you hear anything? Was there beeping to show that the call had connected?
So you're saying that they become aware as soon as it's a connection, and then they hang up, is that right?
Well, I guess so, yes.
If that story had been true, Matthew would have had to have heard someone say that to him, and there would have had to been a connection on the telephone line, and there wasn't.
Had Matthew killed his mother, brother and sister? And if so, what was the possible motive?
Has there ever been an occasion in the past where you've had an argument with your mother over the use of the car?
Matthew de Gruchy's fingerprints and blood had been found at the crime scene. He told police that he had stayed at his girlfriend's on the night of the murders, arriving there late because of crank calls that had come into the de Gruchy house. But when police checked, there was no record of them. Police were continuing to interview their prime suspect, this time about the discovery of the bodies.
Now, in the statement you made last Wednesday, the 13th, you spoke to the detective and he recorded in the statement about when you arrived home. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Well, can you just go over that again for me, please?
I arrived home at about 8:30, 8:35.
Hello?
Matthew told the police he returned home that morning to grab his wallet that he'd forgotten he'd left there, and then headed straight down to the local shops.
In the statement you say that you left the house and then went to get some cigarettes. Is that correct? Well, it doesn't record a nod. You're going to have to say yes or no.
Yes.
And then you returned to the house. Is that correct?
Yes, after the shop.
And that's what it says in your statement that you made that day, that you came back to the house from the shop after purchasing the cigarettes.
Yeah.
Well, what did you do then?
Opened the front door, walked inside, I went to the kitchen. I realised it was quiet. I went back down the hallway. Sort of hit Sarah's door. Just didn't really worry about it. And then opened my mum's door.
What did you do then?
I realised about me mum.
did you... What happened then?
Well, I didn't know what had happened, so I just, break down and all that. Ran outside, and then just to find help, and then I saw Steve across the road.
There's something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
In the statement obtained from Steve Bailey, he says that Matthew came out and said there's something up with Mum and Sarah.
There's something wrong with Mum and Sarah.
When interviewing Matthew, we spoke to him about what he did when he entered the house, and we specifically put it to him, did you go to your sister's bedroom?
Did you go to the lounge room at that time at all?
No.
Now, on that occasion, did you go to the dining room?
No.
Did you go to the kitchen?
No.
Did you go to your sister's bedroom?
When put to him, did he go into Sarah's bedroom? He said he didn't. If he hadn't have gone in there, how did he know that something happened to Sarah?
Now, you drove to Alyssa's place, that's correct?
Yeah.
And you arrived there sometime around 11, is that correct?
Yeah.
And that's what you said in your previous statement?
Yeah.
Whereabouts did you... and you drove your mother's car, is that correct?
Yeah.
Matthew had used the family car on occasions and put a lot of kilometres on it, so we've been told. And as such, the family had decided that he could use his father's car, his father's work vehicle. Normally, Matthew's father would have been home on that evening, but that day he'd been staying in Sydney, and as such, Matthew couldn't use his father's car. So he had to use his mother's vehicle to travel.
Matthew was therefore the last person who had access to the car on the night of the murders.
Has there ever been an occasion in the past where you've had an argument with your mother over the use of the car?
I wouldn't call it an argument.
I asked Matthew in an interview if there'd ever been any arguments over his use of his mother's vehicle, and he said, well, I wouldn't call them arguments, but we'd had received information that there had been some dispute between Matthew and his mother over the use of the car.
Has there ever been an occasion when your mother has declined your use of the car and you have threatened her with any physical force?
No.
Has there ever been an occasion where you've assaulted your mother?
No.
So Matthew was given the opportunity to confess to his involvement.
That concludes the interview.
He didn't take that opportunity. We allowed him to leave the police station. Then we went about our work to gather the evidence to show that he was the person that committed those crimes.
Without any witnesses, the detectives and forensic investigators would need to put together a whole jigsaw of circumstantial evidence. They already had Matthew's fingerprints on the jerry can, and they had found his blood in the house. And Matthew had been the last person to use his mother's car.
I received a carpet fibre that was found in the back of Jennifer de Gruchy's car. The fibre was about 3 centimetres long, and what was interesting about it was right at the end of it was a small red-brown stain. Because it was so small, there wasn't a lot of testing we could do with it, so what we did was we cut a small amount of that staining off and put it into a tube to pursue it with DNA testing. The tests on the carpet fibre found that the DNA could not have come from anybody in the family but Matthew de Gruchy.
That fibre had matched the carpet fibres in Jennifer's room, and police speculated how Matthew's blood came to be there.
He possibly could have bled as a result of a nosebleed through pressure. We've made inquiries, and that is a possibility that some people can bleed through the nose just as a result of the pressure that they're under. We really couldn't say how it got there. Suffice to say that it was Matthew's blood.
9 days after the murders, Matthew was attending the funeral of his mother, sister and brother. It would take another 2 months before police would get the vital breakthrough and the last piece of the jigsaw they needed to complete their case. It had now been 2 months since Jennifer, Sarah and Adrian had been bludgeoned to death. Matthew de Gruchy, the prime suspect for their murders, was now spending time between the family home and that of his girlfriend. The police were still gathering their evidence, and lucky for them, a group of teenagers had an inquisitive nature.
I was about 16 at the time. A couple of mates lived right near this old quarry. It had a big dam in there, and this one particular day we were deciding to make a jump that went into the dam. We climbed up a bit higher onto this big ledge so we could actually see if we'd see how deep the water was, noticing something red in the water.
I'm not going in, man. Neither am I. You can. Stinks.
That's only water.
My mate walked into the water to grab the bag. He then started walking back towards us as we all met him to grab the bag off him, as we all wanted to know what was in there. And as we opened it, there was a couple of bits of carpet, looked like what was squashed paper, and a hammer, which we actually decided to keep the hammer, and threw the bag back in the water as we had no need for it.
The boys had found the bag only days after the murders. So when it came to the attention of the police 2 months later, they immediately drained the dam to find that evidence.
Detectives searched a dam at Woonona. It's alleged they found a number of items, many identified as having come from the de Gruchy household, including a video recorder, compact discs and a lady's purse with a photo licence of Jennifer de Gruchy.
The fact that we'd located the property was a big plus for us, because it certainly indicated to us that we were on the right path.
Earlier on, when Matthew had provided the list of items stolen from the house, it did appear a little bit odd to us that he was able to be so specific. Then when the items were found in the dam, it tended to confirm those suspicions, as the majority of items listed in fact turned up. There was a calculator which had the name A. de Gruchy, which is obviously Adrian's calculator, which was on the list as being stolen. There was also a lady's wallet with paperwork belonging to Jennifer de Gruchy. There's a video recorder and a number of other items, including a number of pieces of carpet which appeared as though they may well have been the carpet pieces that had been cut from the bedroom floor.
So did Matthew have time to kill 3 people, stage a robbery, cut the carpet, wipe the floor, drive to the dam to dispose of incriminating evidence, and then get to his girlfriend's by 11 p.m?
After discovery of the dam and the proximity of the dam to Alyssa's place, I then caused a couple of the members of my team to travel from the home of Matthew to the dam, then to Alyssa's. And what I got them to do was to travel at different speeds so I could see how long it would take just to satisfy ourselves that that was capable and possible to be done, which we did. It was certainly within the time frame.
Apart from the missing items from the house that were found in the dam and bag, another crucial piece of evidence existed.
There was a small plastic resealable bag located with the property, which appeared to contain a number of band-aids and what appeared to be small torn pieces of paper. It was visible on the paper that there was some sort of handwriting.
I think there were 13 pieces of paper in all that needed to be reconstructed. The document had been moist, it had been in water, and that some of the letters had actually bled into the fibres of the paper. When I was able to reconstruct the document, there were a number of words on that document, commencing with open gate, open blinds, Mum, Sarah, Adrian, hit self with pole, cut somewhere with knife.
It appeared to us, once the note was put together, it was a checklist of things that needed to be done to make it appear that someone else had committed the crimes in the Gruchy household.
After the actual reconstruction of the documents, I was able to then compare the handwriting on that reconstructed document with known samples of Matthew de Gruchy's handwriting. There are about 12 points altogether that were fairly strong, similar features appearing between the two. I was of the opinion that it was probable that Matthew de Gruchy wrote the question writing, in that it was more likely than not that he did than he didn't.
We arrested him and charged him with the murder of his mother, brother and sister.
7 Nightly News with Ross Simons.
Good evening. An 18-year-old Wollongong man has been refused bail on charges of killing his mother, brother and sister. Matthew de Gruchy was arrested after a 3-month investigation into the triple murder.
Matthew claims he spent the night at his girlfriend's and only discovered the bodies when he returned home in the morning. Crown Prosecutor Paul Conlon claims DNA evidence links Matthew to the murder scene.
I think the finding of that carpet fibre with blood on it, which ultimately proved to be the blood or consistent with the blood of Matthew de Gruchy, was very significant in this case when we came to look at the fact that pieces of carpet had been cut out of the main bedroom. I commented to the jury that the person responsible for these killings had left his calling card on that carpet. All of the facts and circumstances in that case ultimately pointed in one direction and one direction alone, and that was to the guilt of Matthew de Gruchy.
A man is facing life in jail after being found guilty of murdering his mother, brother and sister. Matthew de Gruchy was just 18. The jury ruled he bashed them to death at the family home and then tried to make it look like a robbery.
I noticed that when the verdict was brought down, there was no reaction from him at all. He maintained a bit of a steely glare down towards his feet, and that was a pose which he maintained throughout the course of the trial.
Given that we had no murder weapon and no apparent motive for the crime, the forensic aspects of this case were so powerful that they were able to prove beyond reasonable doubt the involvement of Matthew de Gruchy in the commission of these 3 murders.
2.5 years after the murder of his mother, sister and brother, Matthew de Gruchy was sentenced to a minimum jail term of 21 years and a maximum of 28. His earliest release from prison would be in 2017, when he is 39 years old.
Whether it was because his mother wouldn't lend him the car or any other reason or disputes previously, I don't know. All I know is that all the evidence we had pointed towards Matthew and didn't point towards anyone else. So the only person that really knows why he did what he did is Matthew.